It was meant to be a quiet diplomatic summit. But when the Nigerian president mocked Ibrahim Traoré in front of the entire African Union, he didn't expect a thunderous, historical response. What happened next left the room speechless and changed the conversation about African leadership forever. In this powerful real-time drama, we witness how dignity, truth, and conviction can shatter decades of political arrogance. Traoré's calm reply stunned not just the crowd, but an entire generation who had been waiting for a new voice to rise. The marble halls of the African Union headquarters gleamed under the morning sun. Diplomats and presidents arrived one by one, handshakes, smiles, rehearsed speeches. The air buzzed with a low hum of protocol. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso entered quietly, wearing his signature fatigues instead of a suit. He was the youngest in the room, barely in his 30s, and yet his reputation echoed louder than most. Some nodded respectfully. Others whispered. To many, he was the spark of a new African age. To others, a threat to the established order. It was midway through the summit when the Nigerian president took the stage. A veteran in politics, polished and powerful, he knew how to command a room. But power sometimes breeds arrogance. I find it amusing, he said, scanning the room with a smug grin, that some of our newer leaders think military jackets make them revolutionaries. Africa needs stability, not symbolism. A few chuckled. Others looked down uncomfortably. Everyone knew who the comment was aimed at. Traoré didn't flinch. He simply looked up, his eyes steady, calm, unreadable. The moderator asked if any leader wished to respond. Silence. Then, a chair scraped softly as Ibrahim Traoré stood. No theatrics. No fury. Just silence before a storm. He walked slowly to the podium, greeted the assembly with a nod, and leaned slightly forward. His first words pierced like a blade through silk. I did not come here to be mocked, but if mockery is the price of speaking truth, I will pay it in full. The room froze. He spoke of colonial scars still open, of leaders who had traded their people's dignity for Western applause, of pipelines flowing out while children starved at home. You say Africa needs stability, he said, but what we need is sovereignty. You mistake my uniform for theater. But this cloth was worn by Sankara, and he, unlike many in this room, died poor but free. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Even the Nigerian president looked stunned. Before he became president, Olusegun Okonjo was a business mogul, the son of a wealthy oil tycoon and a Harvard-educated economist. He rose through Nigeria's corridors of power with charisma and connections. In his early days, Okonjo was hailed as a reformer, but decades in office hardened him. His administration had stabilized Nigeria's currency, but also faced constant accusations of enriching a political elite while leaving entire regions in poverty. He became a master of diplomacy, especially with foreign powers. His government received generous praise from France, the U.S., and the IMF, and he believed African stability came not through resistance, but through negotiation with old empires. Ibrahim Traoré was born under a Burkinabe sky thick with dust and revolution. His childhood was marked by stories of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary who renamed the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. Traoré grew up not just poor, but aware. He studied hard, joined the military, and watched, with clenched fists, as foreign corporations looted his homeland's gold and manganese while children in Ouagadougou went to bed hungry. Then came the coup of 2022, swift, clean, and unapologetic. Traoré seized power not for wealth, but for redemption. He expelled French forces. He nationalized mining contracts. He walked into African summits not with a designer suit, but with a soldier's soul. Traoré's voice grew deeper. Mr. Okonjo, he said slowly, turning to face the Nigerian president directly. Your Excellency, you speak of jackets and revolutions. But tell us, how many oil barrels have left your delta, and how many mouths in Kano still go unfed? The Nigerian delegation bristled. But Traoré didn't stop. Your people suffer not because of war, but because of compromise. You shook hands with the same hands that once enslaved your ancestors. And now you mock those who refuse to kneel. Every leader in the room was silent now. Even the translators hesitated, caught in the weight of his words. Unbeknownst to many, a hidden camera in the summit room, authorized by the South African press, was live-streaming the session to a secured feed. When a technician at the SABC newsroom saw what was unfolding, he made a decision that would change everything. He clicked broadcast publicly. Within minutes, Twitter exploded. Hashtags began trending. Hashtag Traoré Truth. Hashtag Mock No More. Hashtag African Lion Rises. Young people from Ghana to Gabon tuned in. What began as a diplomatic summit became a continental reckoning. In Ethiopia, the prime minister looked down, visibly shaken. In Egypt, the president crossed his arms, nervous. In Rwanda, Kagame leaned forward with a half-smile, studying Traoré like a chess player watching a bold new piece emerge. Traoré ended with this: "We do not wear these uniforms to look strong. We wear them because we are at war, not with other nations, but with a system that has robbed Africa of its soul. You can mock me, but history will not." And then he stepped away from the podium. Thunderous silence. Then one slow clap, followed by another, and then a wave. Applause. Real, reluctant, reverent. In Paris, the French president called for an emergency meeting. In Washington, think tanks scrambled. Who is this Traoré? In Lagos, young Nigerians took to the streets, not against Traoré, but against their own president. Graffiti appeared overnight. Africa needs Traorés, not tycoons. President Okonjo released a tight-lipped statement the next day, trying to downplay the confrontation. But it was too late. The fire had already leapt from the summit into the streets. The day after the summit, editorials from Senegal to Seychelles headlined one word: reckoning. Traoré's speech triggered debates in universities, mosques, churches, and marketplaces. It wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was about Africa's soul. Countries began reevaluating their ties with France, the UK, and China. Cameroon's youth protested the presence of foreign military bases. The Tanzanian president quietly canceled a rare earth mining deal with a Canadian firm. And in Nigeria, President Okonjo's approval ratings plummeted. His cabinet went into crisis mode. A younger generation inside his own party began to whisper, "It's time for someone else." 1 week later, Traoré delivered an unannounced televised address, not just to Burkina Faso, but to all of Africa. He stood in front of a simple map of the continent. What if we stopped begging for aid, he asked. What if we created a Pan-African currency backed by our own resources? What if we trained our youth to defend, innovate, and lead, not emigrate? The broadcast reached 44 million viewers live. His proposal: a continental defense compact to replace foreign military dependencies. A resource sovereignty act urging countries to renegotiate or revoke colonial-era contracts. The foundation of a youth leadership league headquartered in Ouagadougou. Back in Abuja, Okonjo refused to acknowledge the shift. He called Traoré's words idealistic and destabilizing. But Nigerian youths weren't listening. Protests erupted in Port Harcourt and Kano, demanding nationalization of oil contracts, reduction of IMF influence, and dialogue with Traoré's movement. A rogue faction of senators introduced a motion to withdraw Nigeria from select Western economic pacts. Okonjo tried to clamp down, but every action only fueled the fire. By year's end, he was facing a motion of no confidence. 7 African nations met in Accra and quietly signed an agreement. They called it the Alliance for African Sovereignty, AAS. Founding members: Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, Tanzania, Eritrea, South Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The alliance had one goal: economic and military independence from non-African powers. Their first act, shutting down over 30 Western-owned mining and logging operations operating under exploitive licenses. France reacted with sanctions. The EU threatened embargoes. But the bloc responded with unity and surprising support from China and Brazil, who offered trade deals without political strings attached. In February, Nigeria held a snap election. Despite efforts to suppress it, a 38-year-old independent candidate named Zainab Adu, a former student of Sankar's ideology and an admirer of Traoré, won in a landslide. She called Okonjo the face of polite neo-colonialism. Her first call as president was to Traoré. Within weeks, Nigeria joined the AS, instantly turning it into the most powerful bloc in Africa. In a landmark summit in Ouagadougou, the alliance unveiled a digital currency, the Umoja, Swahili for unity. Backed by a basket of African commodities, gold, cobalt, oil, and food exports, the Umoja threatened to upend the CFA franc, the euro-backed currency still used in parts of West Africa. The French government called it reckless. The IMF called it dangerous. But within 6 months, Umoja was adopted in 12 countries, and remittances surged due to lower fees and direct peer-to-peer transfers. Paris couldn't stay quiet. A secret memo leaked. Operation Syndra, ASH, a covert plan to destabilize the AAS through misinformation, NGO infiltration, and economic disruption. But the alliance had anticipated this. They launched AfriNet, a Pan-African encrypted communication system and media platform, exposing propaganda in real time. Traoré gave a chilling speech at a press conference. Let be known, the age of invisible chains is over. You may come with whispers and sabotage, but we come with clarity and conviction. By 2030, the African Union held its most dramatic vote ever. A motion passed to rewrite the AU Charter, prioritizing local resource control, joint continental defense, Pan-African education standards, and a phased plan for open borders and internal trade routes. It became known as the New Umoja Compact. And for the first time in decades, there was hope, real hope, that Africa would shape its future without dependency. At a youth summit in Nairobi, a child asked Traoré, "Why didn't you shout when he mocked you?" Traoré smiled and replied, "Because dignity speaks louder than rage, and history listens when you speak with purpose." Inspired by Africa's shift, countries in the Caribbean and South America began calling for their own versions of the Umoja Compact. Indigenous leaders from Canada to Brazil formed a global sovereignty circle, and universities around the world taught a new case study, the day Africa changed course. It began with a mockery and ended with a movement. The flags of 54 African nations rippled in the wind above a massive marble plaza in Bamako, Mali. It was the 40th anniversary of the Umoja Pact, now called the African Continental Alliance. The once divided nations of the continent were now tied together by a single currency, a unified continental defense, an inter-African high-speed railway, and most importantly, a culture of shared dignity. The event was a celebration, but also a reunion. At the center of the gathering stood a figure draped, not in military attire, but in a simple white robe lined with the Pan-African colors. Ibrahim Traoré, now gray-bearded, walked with a cane carved from Burkina mahogany. His presence alone silenced the crowd, yet his smile was soft, almost amused, as if watching history from the other side of a river. Beside him stood Zainab Adu, the now elder stateswoman from Nigeria, her hand gently holding his elbow for support. They had once been leaders of divided nations. Now, they were guardians of a united legacy. In her speech, Zainab recalled the infamous summit of 2025. "We remember the day when one voice changed everything. Not because it was loud, but because it was true." She turned to Traoré. "And to think, once our nations stood on opposite sides of a room. Today we stand as one. And there is no more mockery, only memory. And from memory, we have built peace." The crowd rose. Applause echoed across Bamako. Traoré took the microphone slowly. He paused. His voice was older, more fragile, but still sharp with purpose. "I was once mocked for wearing this uniform." He gestured to a photo on the screen behind him, showing his younger self in fatigues. "And today, I stand before you wearing nothing but peace." The lesson we learned is that nations can grow apart, but they can grow back together if they share one thing: the will to rise without stepping on each other. Nigeria taught us oil. Burkina taught us gold. Rwanda taught us reconciliation. Ghana taught us pride. And now, together, we teach the world what unity means. Tears glistened in the eyes of diplomats, farmers, students, elders. No one saw countries anymore. They saw family. Over the past 2 decades, Burkina Faso and Nigeria had become pillars of continental development. Joint energy pipelines now flowed across both nations, shared equally. The Sahel Security Corps, once fragmented militias, had been reformed into a Pan-African peacekeeping force, led equally by Nigerian and Burkinabe commanders. University exchange programs blossomed between Lagos, Bobo Dioulasso, and Dakar. Children now learned about Sankara, Nkrumah, Lumumba, and Mandela, but also about the day a man stood calmly in a summit and reminded the continent of its worth. As the sun set over the plaza, a group of children climbed the stage, barefoot, singing an old Burkinabe lullaby. They carried a torch sculpted from recycled metals, engraved with the words, "Dignity, Unity, Tomorrow." They handed it to Traoré. He smiled, kissed it, and then passed it on to a young girl from Nigeria and a boy from Ethiopia. Symbolically, he had passed Africa's future forward, no longer held by generals or presidents, but by children. As fireworks lit the night, Traoré sat in the front row, quietly holding a letter in his hand. It was from the son of the late President Olusegun Okonjo, the man who had once mocked him. The letter read, "My father was wrong that day, but I thank the gods he lived long enough to watch the continent he loved finally rise. You showed him, and all of us, that strength is not in shouting, but in standing still and speaking truth. From my family to yours, we honor you." As the crowd danced and sang into the night, someone asked Traoré what he felt looking back over the years. He leaned back in his chair, the firelight dancing across his weathered face. And with a calm, almost amused voice, he whispered, "It was meant to be a quiet summit." Then he chuckled. But sometimes history doesn't ask for permission. And with that, he closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in peace. Africa had risen, together, forever.